Welcome to the Born to be a Badass podcast, the show about the intersection of women's empowerment, embodiment, and self-defense, and what women need to know and do to enhance their physical, mental, and emotional safety. Here's your host, 4th degree black belt and self-protection expert, Cynthia Jolicoeur-Rude.
Welcome to the Born to be a Badass podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Jolicoeur-Rude, and today we have a special show for Fierce and Female Friday with Melissa Salt. You may remember Melissa was on the show in episode 1 and talked about her life story and a whole bunch of tips and insights into the world of self-defense. And this episode today is focused on the topic of boundaries. So let's start with a definition of what a boundary is. According to Wordnik online, a boundary is something that indicates a border or a limit. The Cambridge Dictionary says a boundary is the limit of what someone considers to be acceptable behavior. Merriam-Webster says it's a real or imaginary point beyond which a person or thing cannot go. Psychology Today says that establishing boundaries is one of the best ways to preserve your emotional energy and define who and what you allow in your life. And then it goes on to define 7 types of boundaries: physical, mental, emotional, sexual, moral, spiritual, and financial. Psych Central adds a couple more: verbal, material or belongings, time, and workplace. So you can see the list of boundaries can be quite long. In her article, Setting Boundaries is a Girl's Best Friend, Melissa writes that setting and defending our boundaries is our first line of defense. For women, it can be highly effective, nipping a situation in the bud. Boundaries help keep us safe. They are the lines and borders we draw around our comfort zones, personal space, and private lives. Boundaries communicate how much contact we're okay with or want and don't want, not just with strangers, but friends, coworkers, and loved ones. In the absence of firmly communicated boundaries, we are more vulnerable to predators or those who will take advantage. So today, we are going to dig into some of the standard questions of what are boundaries and how do you set them and how do you enforce them, and a whole lot more. Here we go, Melissa.
Well, I have to say that is the best lead-in I have heard about boundaries ever. The definitions and what you cite from myself, it's like, okay, the show's over now. That's really all I have to say. Well, it's the context, it's the umbrella, it's the big picture, and we can certainly break that down more. But, the question, why the setting and articulating of our boundaries is so vital in self-defense. I could go on and on about this. I will say that in all my experience in decades, and I know I speak for colleagues, that of all the techniques we teach, physical moves, ground fighting, all the stuff we do, the most important technique and takeaway, in my opinion, is the setting and defending of boundaries, because it will prevent attacks. And in actual studies that have been done, for example, I stay abreast of all of these studies. A lot of them have done in academic settings with college students, but not all of them. It turns out that spending time on 2 things, understanding consent, this is regarding sexual assault, and the ability to assert and express boundaries are the 2 most important tools that women learn that actually are effective in preventing assaults. And it's for all of the reasons that you said. Boundaries are guardrails. We all have them. They are our first line of defense. It determines what we're comfortable with, what kind of contact we want with people, what kind of contact we don't want with people, the quality of that contact. Is it hugging? Is it waving hi? Is it intimate kissing? And the quantity and how much of that. So what happens is, in the absence, let me put it this way, in the absence of boundaries, and None of this is our fault. If we lack or forget or don't know how to set or defend boundaries, if somebody takes advantage of us, that's never our fault. However, that being said, it is our right and our responsibility to know where we draw lines, our red lines, and the ability to set them is what makes us far less vulnerable to intrusion or manipulation or assault or attack, or even worse, being owned. And I'm going to tell you a story about that in a minute. You know, we lock our doors. That's setting of boundaries. Our bodies are like countries in one sense, and they have borders. We have skins. We have physical skin, and we have kind of an invisible skin around us. And within that, it determines who we are, what's in our hearts, our physicalities, what's in our minds. It determines what makes us self-possessed, right? So when there's a lack of firm boundaries, it is a bloody jackpot for predators or criminals, abusers. It's a dream gift because then they think wrongly they can just take what they can, right? So it's imperative that we be able to, as females, set firm boundaries, not weak ones, because that's what predators and criminals will look for, is a female with weak boundaries, because it lets them in, so to speak, right? So we must do that. It can save us a lifetime of suffering. Boundaries are basically, I'm going to talk a little bit, and before I get into the tools of it, it means I set my boundaries. It means if you come within my space, it should be by invitation only. Okay? So it's what allows us to maintain our safety, our heart, our minds, our sense of self, and all those good things. So setting boundaries, a lot of people in self-defense kind of think, oh, it's a minor little thing. I'm going to teach all these physical techniques, and then I'm going to do a few words about boundaries, and I'll have some guy dressed as a bad guy. He'll come in and he'll bark some shit at people, sorry, and they'll have to say stop. But that is by no means the full example of what is entailed in setting boundaries. It can be very subtle. It's much harder for us to set and defend boundaries with people that we know and love and with strangers. Mm-hmm. So, again, it really should be by invitation only. And I would like to go to a short story, and then I want to get into more of the concrete stuff about what exactly are boundaries and how do we do it and what are the tools and, all that good stuff. But I'll just tell you, for example, I just spoke about what happens in the absence of boundaries. Criminals, bad guys, manipulators, would-be abusers, and so forth, they see that as a power vacuum and they will move in. This is a story. It's not a great story, but I think it will resonate with a lot of females. Now, I think I've mentioned I'm 65. When I was 14, I had a boyfriend, and I didn't know how to set boundaries. And I can remember the exact day I sat on his lap. It was in a car. His grandmother was driving us to some kind of pool, maybe a couple of months after dating. And he said to me as I sat on his lap, "You belong to me." And at the time, this was back in the day where we didn't have these tools, we didn't have this awareness. And even though part of me was reluctant because I thought, hey, I belong to the world, I have big dreams, right? And I said, okay, huge mistake. Not my fault. But what happened was he got to think that he owned me because I put up no resistance. I didn't say no. I didn't say, hey, wait a minute. I didn't do any of those assertions. And over time, it became a very pathological relationship where, in fact, he abused and controlled me, and it ended up with me being pregnant at 14. Now, that's an extreme example.
So I have to say that's not a rare example, though, because
it's not.
Working with teen girls today, one of the really big issues is how do you recognize warning signs that a relationship is not going to be a healthy one? And that kind of thing of I own you, it's very easy even for today's teen girls to kind of feel flattered and to think, oh, well, this means he really loves me.
Exactly. And that's such a great point. And so, exactly, sort of as a side note, I was a very chunky, chubby kid. And in my day growing up, it was like, hey, you're, a little chubby girl and you've still got a cute boyfriend. That's a keeper. So it degraded fast. I'm a feisty girl, and I was always feisty, so I never internalized all of the blame and the shame he would consequently lay on me, and I had to wear certain jewelry, and I couldn't go in certain places. It was a very pathological thing. I never accepted it all, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't have the tools. I didn't know how to assert myself and say no. This is not okay. I want these sexual, interactions with you, blah, blah, blah. And you're right. We still see that today, even with all the awareness and so on. So I'm only sharing this story because it's an extreme example. And it could be a 45-year-old woman with a potentially abusive partner. It could be the same story, basically. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. And I'm going to get into this, to first of all identify and know what are the signs for us, because it varies, for when we're uncomfortable, for when something feels like a no, when it doesn't feel okay. Then the ability to express that, to verbalize that, and to say that in no uncertain terms, and to back it up because it will be tested. So in the absence of boundaries, that's why I'm saying it's the most important tool. It's an invitation inadvertently, albeit, to those who would abuse, control, etc., to step in. And that's what's always being tested. So let me talk a little bit, what do we mean by boundaries? Now, you offered some fantastic definitions from various sources. And just to reiterate, boundaries are the lines, the limits that we draw. Like if we were a country, you'd have borders. If those borders are crossed, then there's a breach of boundaries. Anytime a crime or a violent sexual act or sexual assault occurs, it means that a boundary has been crossed. So our best hope and our best effort should be in being able to set those limits, and then we know when they are being crossed, and we may have to, go up to the next level of physical defense or whatever. So boundaries determine what we're comfortable with. And, what we're not comfortable with, and who, and the quality, and the who we're comfortable with. With our kids, we're comfy. Hey, they run to you, we hug them and all that, right? It determines ownership and authority. But we have different levels of boundaries for different people. It is not one size fits all, right? Mm-hmm. Certain people we let close into our lives, and we're comfortable with that, and certain people we want to keep out. So when we lock the doors, we're setting a boundary. When we close office door before COVID, only people had offices, it's saying, my door is closed, please do not come in without knocking. So if somebody comes in without knocking, that's not life or death. It's still an opportunity to stand up and say, oh my gosh, hey partner, hey coworker, I love you, I care about you, but it's not okay for you to come in. When my door is closed, I need you to knock. So it exists on a whole continuum in life, how we set boundaries. And there are various pieces that we're going to do that with: voice, our body language, our demeanor, attitude, so on and so forth. So let me, before I even get into that, tell you a quicker story. And this goes back to the early days of the Me Too movement, and Harvey Weinstein, his ill and predator behavior. Mm-hmm. There's an actress. She's a beautiful, amazing African actress. I'm gonna wreck her last name, I'm sure. It's Lupita Nyong'o. Now this is what I'm going to tell you is another example of setting a boundary, and why. So she was out with him. Obviously, he's a powerful figure in the field, in the industry. And they went out, but of course he's a predator. And he had a particular drink that he liked. It was some kind of vodka with diet soda. I don't know what it was. It was something like that. Now, the wait person came, and he ordered for her. This is something called forced teaming, and I'm going to get into this another time, and it's one of Gavin DeBecker's tips. Mm-hmm. So he is kind of like creating a false sense of bonding. So he ordered the same drink for her. Now, Lupita actually stood up for him. She's one of the only actresses who felt able to do that. And she said, no, actually, I don't like that drink. I like another drink. Now, that may seem like a small thing, and there was a second thing, because he as a would-be or predator is looking at, can he control her? Can he, in this case, order for her with this kind of forced teaming and in effect enter her mind? And, it's a kind of control. So she said no, and she got her drink. So the long story short is she was not assailed by him. She was one of the few who was able to stand up. But that was another clue. So
that's really interesting. Can I just jump in real quick? Because it sounds as though that little test was like, how much can I get away with? It was like dipping the toe in the pool to see what's the water really going to be like. And, from her perspective, she passed the test, right? From his perspective, she failed the test.
And that angered him.
Yeah.
But she was willing to do it because she was also willing to take the loss. She had decided, I mentioned this loss thing because it comes into play. When women, and I'm only really talking about women here, although this happens to men too, say, hey, that's not okay with me. I'm asserting my limits. This is as far as I want to go, or you're too close, get back. And in many ways that we assert boundaries, which I will get into, you're saying it exactly right. It's a test. He's saying, just like a criminal might do, how much can I get away with? So setting boundaries, like I say, has as much to do with setting limits around our mind, our authority, our sense of self, and it's what keeps us intact as, having the ownership of our own lives and determining, what's not okay around that. So that's another example. You don't really normally think about that, but it is, and I thought it was a brilliant example of, in her case, being able to set limits and saying no, even though she didn't use those particular words.
But that is really cool, though. And I guess my question is, what if you set a boundary like that and it doesn't actually thwart the bad guy or stop the behavior that's going on? Then what? And is that because you didn't set the right thing, or does that tell you something about the other person?
Well, that's a really great question. My quick answer is it tells you something about the other person. That's information. It's saying, I do want to get into the nuts and bolts of this, and I will answer your question about, well, what if it doesn't work? Because nothing works all the time. Like I said, setting boundaries and limits are one of our first lines of defense. And it's also used as information to know that somebody has more harmful intent. So that's information about him. In this case, if he said, hey, no, we're having the drink my way. I mean, this is honestly, I would say that's a very dangerous sign because this is somebody who wants to manipulate and control you. So it's never that we do things wrong. I hesitate to say that. However, like I said, I want to repeat that it is our job because we own ourselves. We're the only ones with ourselves to protect ourselves all the time. So we need to be able to set these limits. Just like a country has sovereign boundaries, so do we. So if I may hold that question for a minute and get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of how do we set these limits? What are the tools? How do we do it? And what happens? Because it will, okay? And boundaries are often tested multiple times. It's not one time. So we have to be prepared to kind of stick to our guns and repeat what we say, because a predator will try and wear down a woman's boundaries. They will hunt for openings and weakness and so forth. So let me clarify this more with a more concrete example, if I may. When I'm teaching, for example, when I'm presenting boundaries, which is a chunk of material, and defining it and getting other people's input on what it means and hearing those stories, then I'm going to do a display. I'm going to show and tell what we mean by boundaries. So, for example, I might portray, I'm walking down the street. I'm going to give you a really simple example. Not that it's the answer to everything, but it's a really simple example with basic principles. So I'm walking down the street, and this is a little bit, imagine your mind pre-COVID days. So a jewelry person, right, comes up on the street and says, oh man, I've got this great jewelry I want to sell to you. And they're starting to edge closer. Now, in physical self-defense, setting boundaries has a lot to do with control of distance. And let's just say, I just say, hey, dude, sorry, I'm not interested, and I walk on my way, and he leaves. That's great. I set a simple boundary, and he respected it and left. Now let's replay that. I'll often replay things 2 and 3 times, each time escalating. So now I'm walking down the same street. A person approaches me again. And, hey, I'm selling you this jewelry or these goods or whatever. And I say, no, sorry, I'm not interested, right? And I sort of walk on my way. This time, he doesn't let me walk on my way. He stands in front of me. He blocks my path. And he escalates. His voice is louder. No, man, you gotta really try, you gotta, whatever it is, right? Again, this is just a simple example. Now, because we get a volume and an intensity dial, if you will, when we're setting and defending boundaries. Now, as I show this example, I'm going to stand firmer in my base. And again, I'm going to 4 or 5 specific tools in a sec. I stand firmer in my base. I look him square in the eyes. Maybe I up my volume a little bit. I'm not saying, get out of my face, you ugly, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to attack a person because that can escalate it. But I'm being very firm about what's not okay. So I'm saying, I'm really not interested. I said no, that's enough. Now leave me alone, walk on your way, and I'm leaving. It might be that simple, right? And maybe that works, okay? We hope that works, right? So you get, as I said, there's intensity and a volume dial setting our boundaries. I replay it again. I'm walking down the same street. The person approaches. This time he gets very aggressive. And he starts to intrude upon my personal space. Now, in the era of COVID, it so happens that roughly 2 arm's length is the same kind of space, 1.5 to 2 arm's length, that we use in protecting our physical space because it involves a reactionary gap. Give me a second on that thought. So this time, he comes in, he's more aggressive, and I have to go firmer. I dig deeper. Oh, get your ass into it. I was so use lower your center of gravity. Add gravity. I'm serious. I said no. Back away. I'm done. Leave. Walk away. I'm done here. Not like that much. I'm yelling a bit into the call, and I apologize. And if that works, great. If not, your question goes back to the Weinstein story. Well, what if trying to thwart with a certain level of limit doesn't work? Well, then you have to go to the next level. Now, in her case, it might mean leaving the table. It might mean saying, you know what, I don't think this is going to work. And it means willing to accept the loss. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the obstacles for women and why sometimes women don't assert and set their limits and boundaries, A, they don't really know where these limits are, and B, 2 reasons. 1, they don't want to look rude, they don't want to look like a bitch, or they don't want the loss. I mean, because setting and asserting our limits and boundaries might mean you're in a budding romance. There's a certain amount of intimacy, but you don't want to rush it. You don't want to go that far. And the other person, really wants to go a lot further. And they're saying, so being able to set and assert a limit and say, I'm just not comfortable with this, it might mean losing the relationship, literally. It might mean speaking up in a job place because of sexual harassment, and you're finally speaking up and saying, and you might lose a job. So being able to assert and defend our limits and boundaries also means we have to be very honest with ourselves about what we're willing to lose. Now, in a life and death sense, obviously that crap goes out the window. You're asserting your boundaries and you might have to fight for your life. So back to my jewelry salesman, if you will. If I'm teaching in a class, I'm taking it up a notch each time. Now, the 3rd time I take it up a notch, he won't go away, and now he's pissed, and now he grabs me, and now I'm in a physical fight. Now, palm strikes, knee strikes, whatever, and now I have to go physical. And that's why we say the asserting of boundaries are your first line of defense. And it's very effective in nipping a problem in the bud, if you will. And for a lot of younger females, it is very effective in being able to give yourself permission and feel it's okay for you to say no. I don't want to go there. I don't want that kind of sex. I don't want to do this. And being willing to, that's why practice helps. So when I'm teaching, we do practices. And now I want to go to the practice, if it's okay with you, and break down a few key pieces that are called into play for how do we set and assert our boundaries and our limits.
Well, before you do that, I just want to reinforce something that you said, which was being willing to take the loss. And I think we often talk about, in a self-protection situation, knowing what it can cost you to take action and to not take action. And I think it can be very difficult sometimes thinking about what the cost could be. And sometimes, like in your first story when you were just 14, you didn't really know what the cost was of not recognizing and setting that boundary. So I think education is huge. But I love that you bring that up, that you really do need to be prepared to pay the price. If, setting the boundary, but there is going to be a consequence one way or the other. It's either going to be a positive one or not a positive one. So,
and sometimes it's both.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really important piece. I'm really glad that you highlighted that. It is fundamental, really, to all your self-protection.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, it is. I didn't want to over-harp on that, but, if you were to ask me what are the biggest obstacles in terms of women being able to and willing to assert and set boundaries on, you're right. One of them is, we have to consider the loss. And you have to be willing to take that loss, to take the hit in order to be safe and healthy and happier and so on. So, that's often the case. Now, a creepy guy in the street, you're never going to see the guy again. It doesn't matter. You don't have anything at stake there, right? It's just like, get the person away, stop them from getting closer, and, if further action is needed or you need to contact the police, you can help, so be it, right? So but in any situation, I'm going to boil down to a few basic tools in what are actual physical, emotional, psychological tools. The first thing is, and this may sound kindergarten, but a lot of women don't actually know how to identify the feeling that something's been crossed. So here's a set of exercises that I might do in an actual class. This is kind of fun, actually, because prefaces by saying, particularly in a street setting, and not, it could be online, it could be a cyber situation hitting. Somebody approaches, and maybe they have harmful intent, but you don't know that. They're friendly, they're nice, we don't know, right? But if the person has harmful intent, there will be questions, and there will be conversation, and really what's going on, imagine a street situation, really what's going on if we look at it through the predator's mindset, she's thinking and asking, what is her response to my intrusion? Will she let me get closer? Will she let me touch her like this? Can I talk to her in this kind of voice? Can I get her to move someplace else with me? Of course, you never want that to happen. You don't ever want to be isolated. Privacy and control, and we'll save that for the next topic, are two key no-nos. Don't allow privacy and control. So, but in a predator, manipulator, abuser's mind, he's looking at the woman, and it could be, people online who are trying to steal your money. What is her response to my intrusion? And it's your job to shut that shit down, period. Because that's really what's going on. If the person has harmful intent, I don't mean to say that's always the case. Now, that being said, here are the practices that I would teach. So, everybody has boundary setting exercises, and I think a lot of women are accustomed to seeing these pictures of women shouting no in this kind of stance, and it's like, it looks kind of like weird. But the thing is, it's a tiny snapshot of a much longer series of exercises. And at the heart of setting and defending one's boundaries is giving yourself permission to say no in so many words. So here's a few different pieces that we need. If I was teaching, let's say, a class, and I had gone over boundaries, shown some applications. So the exercise is this. let's say you are a student in a class, and now your partner, you say, okay, you get a partner, and they're standing 15, 20 feet or so away from you. Now, first thing I will say is imagine that person is your best friend, and it's been COVID, and you haven't seen them since, and they're going to walk towards you, and you respond accordingly. Well, most people are going to give a big hug, right? Mm-hmm. That's close in boundaries because you allow that. All right. Now the other person gets back to the line. This time they walk towards you, and usually I will have a woman standing in a particular simple stance, not aggressive, but a kind of ready stance. One leg forward, one leg back, settled, breathing, just kind of ready to do whatever. Push off and run, say something, whatever. Now the second time the person comes towards you, and my instruction is, okay, the person walking, you imagine that you're a mail person. You're delivering a piece of mail. A package has arrived. That's your thing. And they walk towards you, and let's look at what happens and what the distance is, because now we're looking at this. So normally it's acceptable, most cultures, that, an arm and a half length or so is appropriate. So they're standing at a bit of a distance, they have a letter in hand, they're saying, hello, ma'am, this is for you. Mm-hmm. That's an appropriate distance, right? Most of us feel comfortable with that, and we sign off on it, and it's a done deal. Now, the third time, go back. And this time, I want the person who's doing the walking, the would-be intruder, if you will, just walk right up to your face. And I want you, the person saying this, to then record and identify what you feel when they are that close. So the person walks right up. And it's yucky. It's usually very uncomfortable. And some people take a step back. But my question is, what did you actually feel that told you that was too close or too dangerous? And some people, we're not all the same people. Some people say, I felt this fluttery feeling of fear. I felt this feeling in my gut. I felt myself get angry. I felt myself feel tense. Okay, great. These are your triggers. Now you understand and you know what are your triggers if somebody is too close and you feel uncomfortable. And by the way, anytime you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to know it. It's time to set a limit or extra years, right? Okay, so now people kind of know what the deal is. Now the next level of exercise, and I will portray this. I'll say, okay, here are some basic tools for setting limits. Understand that these are bumper stickers. They're not everything you do in every situation. They are words and actions that become your sort of just principles. So I have a padded attacker come towards me from maybe 20 feet away. At that point, and it will vary, where I feel I'm uncomfortable. I know this person uncomfortable. My job, when it comes to the exercises, is to be in my good stance, get my hands out in front of me, not too far in front of me. I think that's a terrible mistake when I see this. You don't want to stick your arms 2 feet away from your body where somebody can get grabbed and you're sort of out of your base of power. But you stand upright, your hands come up, palms facing out maybe a foot or so in front of your chest. You're settled, you're breathing. This is important because if street situation or a boundary violation, a person will try to get a rise out of you, literally. Mm-hmm. They will try to get you to fear to rise, etc. So my job is to stand there, collect myself, breathe, settle, and when they are at that point where it's like, that's it, I'm enjoying my life, my job is to say, stop, that's close enough, or stop, step back. Stop, I'm not interested, or some basic similar kind of wording. We need to help people with the language of boundaries. Now, if I'm doing it well enough, and by that I mean it needs to be congruent. My body language, my stance, my voice, my attitude, demeanor, my attitude has to be fluid. Otherwise it means nothing. And they will brush it aside and come right in out. And the congruency really matters when you're setting boundaries, whether it's with a date that you need to say uncomfortably that you don't want to go further, whether it's a stranger on the street, whatever, or a person outside, you need to be congruent. So you can't be like, stop, and bob your head and have their nervous kind of hair flipping flutters and these kind of fluttery behaviors and gaze aversion that women for centuries have been taught. You can't do that.
Also, like what's coming up in my brain is like I see women sometimes and they'll say, "I'm sorry, you need to stop," or "Would you please stop?" And it takes a lot of the away from it. It makes it almost a question.
Yes, and you are completely right. And that's why when I said everything has to be congruent. This is not a question. You have the right and permission to say to somebody, "Stop. That's close enough. Stop. I need you to step back. Stop. I'm not interested." Or even, "No thanks. I'm fine." But the tone of it's a lot. To me, it's a lot about gravity. You sink down. You lower your center of gravity. You don't lean forward. You don't come off of your base. You stay upright, if you will, in your own body posture. With your arms extended, your palms out, but not overextended. You say, and you might need to repeat it. "No, seriously, I mean it. Stop. Get back." Mm-hmm. Now, in the meantime, you might be repositioning yourself off to the side a little bit and start scanning your environment. If I need to run to help, where is that going to be, right? All the situational awareness pieces come into play. None of these are pieces in isolation. They all work together, right? Right. So you're absolutely right. This is something we need to help women with. It's hard because we've been conditioned for eons to be polite, to not be rude, to not hurt a person's feelings, to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Damn it, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Even if you're wrong, even the person means no harm. You're uncomfortable enough. So now I take that progression up from there. Now I'm going through an exercise where, okay, let's just say somebody is pointing from a distance and very menacing intense, and they're starting to charge towards me. "Get in the car. Get in this car." Right? Which of course we know not. I use that because it's just a simple example. Now I have two dials. With boundaries. I have a volume dial and I have an intensity dial. Now I may have to crank it up, and I hesitate to use attention to the phone because it'd be quite loud. I have a very booming voice, if you will. But it's like, "Get back! I need help! Leave me alone! Back off!" It's big and it's loud. And partly I'm trying to draw attention. And none of this works all the time. Again, understand, none of this is foolproof. But I'm trying to draw attention. And maybe I have my 4-year-old behind me. So, I can't just quickly exit. Yeah, maybe I can grab the phone. Is there a place to go to? So my first lines of defense are my voice, my body language, my intent, my demeanor, my attitude, if you will. Mm-hmm. And again, we get to use them accordingly. Now I don't have to crank up on that level if it's a coworker who comes in without knocking. It's as simple as,
that would be a problem.
That would be a problem. That would be a story. So I might just stand up. I always tell women stand up. If you feel stronger standing up, stand up on your own 2 feet. Stand up and just say to the person, "Oh my gosh, Frank, I love working with you. We're a great team, but I'm not comfortable when you put your arm around me. Or, if I don't want to go any further. And this is a difficult conversation, but we need to have it." That's an example of setting a boundary or limit. It's still all about protecting you. It's still about setting a guardrail. Mm-hmm. And so, there are many pieces of this, but the basic ingredients are identifying when you're uncomfortable, what your limits are, being willing and able to express that, and not just silently hold it and go, I demonstrate this much too. A guy comes and puts his arm around me. I pretend to be, "Oh my God, I just wish he would go away." Well, you can't just wish it away. You have to be able to speak. Now, if somebody puts their hand on your leg and you're not comfortable with it, you can't just wish they'd get it. Guys aren't astute. You have to take the hand away, push, get some distance, or as I say, stand up and just say, "Frank, wow, I'm not good with that. I'm not comfortable with that." Now, Frank may end up never being your friend again. So what? Because here's the point. If a person is decent and respects your boundaries and your limits, it will stop the behavior. Now, sometimes it's not once. I always tell women it might take a few passes. Okay, you're dating somebody. It's getting kind of hot and heavy. And there's some amount of sexual activity, but you're not ready for more. You don't want to move again. You don't want certain. So you may have the difficult conversation and make it very specific. I always tell women, be specific. Don't be general. Don't say, oh, I wish you weren't so friendly with me. That doesn't mean anything. Say what the behaviors are that are not okay. And even if it's difficult, we have to become accustomed to this because it's our job. I mean, we're the only ones with us all the time, and we are in the best position, therefore, to protect and defend ourselves and protect and defend our borders. And again, I don't mean to keep pounding on this, but in the studies that have done in terms of reducing sexual assault against women, being willing to assert one's boundaries and communicate them clearly without confusion, as well as understanding and being able to, talk about consent. Some of the difficult conversations are the most important skills. On top of that, of course, physical skills, which, we'll get into, what to do if somebody's already grabbing you, on you, you're lying down,